They told you Milltown food was canned beans and white bread, but the truth behind 25. Milltown foods that fed industrial America is far grittier and more ingenious. From Joseph Argyro's pepperoni rolls baked for West Virginia coal shifts in 1927, to Cornish pasties gripped by crusts meant to keep arsenic off workers' lips, these 25 dishes weren't just lunch. They were hand-built survival tools, engineered in church basements and bakery back rooms, slipping past low wages, brutal hours, and empty refrigerators. If you think factory meals were simple, think again. Each bite was a rebellion and a lifeline. So why did no one ever tell you how the workers truly ate? And what have we lost by forgetting their recipes? Giuseppe Argyro's bakery on Water Street opened its doors in Fairmont, West Virginia in 1927, just as coal dust was thick in the air and the mines were swallowing a generation of new arrivals. Argyro, a Calabrian immigrant, watched the men he worked alongside in the mines break for lunch with a stick of pepperoni in one hand, a hunk of bread in the other, and coal-blackened fingers never far from their food. The problem was plain. Underground, time was rationed, hands were filthy, and every bite had to count. Argyro's solution was as practical as it was brilliant. He took the two things miners already trusted: bread sturdy enough to last a 12-hour shift, pepperoni that wouldn't spoil in the heat, and sealed them together. No knife, no plate, no pause required. The first pepperoni rolls were baked before sunrise, packed warm into tin lunch pails, and carried down ladders into the seams of Marion County. Each roll fit perfectly in a miner's hand, leaving the other free for a tin of water. The bread soaked up the pepperoni's oil, turning the crust golden and fragrant by noon. The filling kept its punch, salty, spicy, a taste of home for men who had left Calabria's sulfur pits for the promise of bituminous coal. By the end of that first year, word had spread through the company houses and boarding rooms. Argyro's bake shop became a lifeline, its shelves emptying before the day's first whistle. The pepperoni roll was more than a snack. It was engineered survival, a way to eat fast and eat well when every minute underground was measured in sweat and risk. It didn't matter if you were Italian, Slovak, or Appalachian born. Everyone in Fairmont knew where to find the bread that kept miners on their feet. The roll's genius was its simplicity. Shelf-stable, high-calorie, cheap enough for a family on scrip, and tough enough to survive a lunch pail's beating. No refrigeration, no utensils, no crumbs wasted. Argyro's invention moved quickly from lunchrooms to union halls, from church picnics to school fundraisers. In West Virginia, the pepperoni roll became the edible badge of a coal town, one that outlasted the boom years and stayed behind when the mines went dark. Long after the last shift ended, Argyro's blueprint for portable nourishment traveled beyond the hills. The bread-meat combo would echo in other mill towns and factory neighborhoods, always shaped by the same need: to feed workers who couldn't afford to stop moving. But in Fairmont, it started with one baker, a borrowed oven, and the memory of men too busy, too proud, and too hungry to settle for anything less than a meal you could hold in one hand and finish before the foreman's shout. Cornish miners in Wisconsin's lead country packed their lunches before dawn, each pasty shaped to fit a gloved hand, each crimped seam pinched shut to hold in the steam. The filling was a question of luck, sometimes beef and rutabaga, sometimes only potato and onion. The crust was thick, not for show, but for survival. Down in the shafts, hands black with dust and sweat, the pasty's edge became a practical handle, though despite the stories, most miners ate every last bite or wrapped their meal in muslin to keep it clean. Some swore by the old superstition, leave the final crust behind for the knockers, those mischievous spirits said to haunt the tunnels. Give them their share, and maybe you'd find a rich vein by week's end. When the copper and iron mines of Michigan's Upper Peninsula opened, Cornish families followed, carrying their recipes and their luck with them. In these new camps, the pasty was more than a meal. It was a sign you belonged. The tradition stuck, even as new waves of workers arrived. Finns, Poles, Italians, each adding their own touches, but never quite replacing the Cornish original. 1,000 miles west, German-Russian settlers on the Nebraska plains faced a different kind of grind. Their answer was the runza, a bread pocket stuffed with beef, cabbage, and onions, sturdy enough to survive a wagon ride out to the fields. The design was pure efficiency, baked in the morning, wrapped in cloth, and still warm by midday. Farmhands could eat while steering a plow or repairing a fence, no fork or table needed. By the 1940s, runzas weren't just home cooking anymore. Sally Everett and her brother Alex Brenning began selling them to factory workers in Lincoln, adapting the old bierock into a new American staple. In 1949, they trademarked the name, and the runza became a fixture at lunch counters and school cafeterias across Nebraska. Today, the state claims more than 80 runza restaurants, each one a testament to a meal designed for work, not leisure. What ties these pocket meals together isn't just dough and filling, it's the logic of the lunch break, food that could be eaten one-handed, standing up, with no time to spare. Whether you came from Cornwall or the Volga, whether you faced the cold of a mine or the wind of the prairie, you learned to make a meal that traveled. In every mill, town, and rail hub, the pocket meal became a quiet equalizer. No one cared where your parents were born, only that you could keep up with the shift. The bread might be different, but the need was the same: to eat quickly, to eat well, and to carry a piece of home into the hardest hours of the day. In Cincinnati, the Karagief brothers opened the doors of Empress Chili in 1922, just as the city's factories and rail yards were pulling in workers from every corner of Europe. The brothers, Greek immigrants from Macedonia, watched as laborers lined up for lunch, pockets thin, bellies empty, hoping for a meal that could stretch a dime into dinner. What they offered wasn't the Texas-style chili that made headlines out west. Their recipe was a careful remix: ground beef cooked slow with cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and a hint of cocoa, poured over spaghetti, then finished with a cascade of shredded cheddar, onions, and beans. 5 layers in all, each one engineered to fill, comfort, and last. The genius of Cincinnati chili wasn't just in the flavor, it was in the math. A single pot could feed dozens, and every spoonful of meat was padded with pasta and beans, cheaper, filling, and easy to serve fast to a crowd. For factory workers clocking 12-hour shifts, this was a meal that stuck with you. For the Karagiefs, it was a ladder out of the tenements, a way to turn old-world memory into new-world stability. By the 1930s, their chili parlor had become a hub for the city's Greek community, a place where newcomers found work, advice, and a plate of food that felt like home. A generation later, Nicholas Lambrinides, another Macedonian immigrant, took the idea further. After years working the line at Empress, he opened Skyline Chili in 1949, building a local empire out of the same basic formula. Serve something familiar, make it affordable, and keep the doors open for anyone hungry enough to come in. Skyline's success wasn't just about taste, it was about access. In a city where paychecks ran thin and the work never stopped, chili parlors became the unofficial break rooms of industrial Cincinnati. The five-way wasn't just a meal, it was a survival strategy, one that turned a handful of spices and a pound of beef into a community's economic backbone. In Cincinnati's West End, the clang of streetcars and the hum of foundries set the pace for a different kind of kitchen science, one where German butchers and Polish home cooks learned to stretch $1 and a pound with equal precision. Goetta, the city's signature breakfast loaf, was never just a sausage. It was a lesson in thrift, built from steel-cut oats, pork scraps, and beef spiced with bay and rosemary, then simmered until every grain swelled with flavor and fat. By the time Glier's Goetta opened in 1946, demand had outgrown the neighborhood butcher shops. Today, Glier's puts out over 1 million pounds a year, and nearly every bit is eaten within 50 miles of the city. Goetta's secret is its chemistry: oats holding moisture, meat holding memory. During the Depression and through wartime rationing, when red points ran out before the month did, families could turn a single pound of pork into a week's worth of breakfasts. Sliced thick, crisped in a skillet, Goetta fueled laborers headed for the rail yards and machine shops. It was more than a meal. It was insurance, a way to make sure nothing went to waste, not even a bone. Across the Great Lakes, another illusion took shape on the dinner table. City chicken, despite its name, has never seen a coop. In Polish and Slovak neighborhoods from Pittsburgh to Detroit, pork and veal were cubed, skewered, breaded, and fried to mimic the prized drumsticks that working families rarely afforded. During the 1930s, when pork sold for half the price of chicken, city chicken became a staple at Union Hall suppers and Sunday dinners alike. The wooden skewers, sometimes salvaged from crates, gave the illusion of plenty, even when meat was scarce. Both Goetta and city chicken transformed the ordinary into the essential. They were built for bulk, for reheating, for stretching through the week. First in cast iron pans at home, then in deep fryers at church fundraisers and community halls. In these dishes, the ingenuity of mill-town cooks turned grain into gold and scraps into celebration, feeding not just families, but entire neighborhoods, one skillet at a time. Friday mornings in Detroit's factory neighborhoods started long before the assembly lines. In the basement kitchens of St. Hyacinth or St. Stanislaus, the clang of stockpots and the sharp scent of onions meant only one thing: pierogi day. By sunrise, rows of flour-dusted tables stretched wall to wall, each lined with women in aprons, some with their hair tied back in kerchiefs, others humming hymns in Polish as they worked. The dough was rolled thin and cut into circles, then filled with potato and farmer's cheese, or sometimes sauerkraut and mushroom for the old country faithful. Pinched shut with practiced thumbs, each dumpling joined the growing mountain waiting for a turn in the boiling cauldron. These weren't just for Sunday supper or family feasts. In the industrial corridors of Detroit and Cleveland, pierogi became a lifeline, A welfare system run by hands, not by City Hall. Every Friday during the cold months, the church doors opened to a line snaking down the block. Factory men with lunch pails, widows with children in tow, neighbors clutching coins and ration books. For a dime, you got a paper bag of steaming dumplings. For $1, you left with enough to last the weekend. The money didn't line anyone's pockets. It paid the heating bill for the parish, kept the soup kitchen open on Mondays, and sometimes bought coal for families whose pay ran out before the month did. The real power of the pierogi wasn't in the filling, but in the scale. On a good week, the women could turn out 1,000 by noon, each one shaped by hands that remembered hunger, war, and the old country's winters. The work was relentless, flour in every crease, steam fogging the windows, laughter and gossip mixing with the rhythm of rolling pins. But as the trays emptied and the line outside faded, the kitchen crew would pause, wipe their faces, and count the crumpled bills. Another week's warmth secured, another neighbor fed. In these church basements, the pierogi became more than a taste of home. It was the currency of survival, proof that a neighborhood could take care of its own when the city and the company looked the other way. In northeastern Wisconsin, when the first chill settled over Brown County, entire neighborhoods would gather before dawn around a steel kettle big enough to bathe a calf. Booyah wasn't just a recipe. It was a community event measured in gallons, not bowls. The work started days ahead, chickens jointed, beef and pork trimmed, mountains of cabbage and potatoes chopped by hand. At sunrise, the fires were lit under 50-gallon kettles, sometimes 3 or 4 lined up in a row, each one tended by a rotating crew of local volunteers. The stew simmered for hours, sometimes 2 days straight, with men and women taking turns at the rim, stirring with canoe paddles as long as a barn beam. Each ingredient went in on its own schedule. First the bones for broth, then onions, carrots, rutabaga, and finally the meat, all layered by the hour and by the hand that brought it. The smell drifted for blocks, drawing folks from church, from the fields, from the paper mills, everyone with a ladle or a coffee can ready to fill. By noon, the line stretched past the parish doors and down the block. Booyah was served by the gallon, poured into pails, or eaten standing elbow to elbow. Every kettle told the story of 100 hands, farmers, mill workers, school kids, each one adding a little more to the pot, and each one leaving full. In Green Bay, Booyah meant more than dinner. It meant you belonged. That was community, cooked slow, with no shortcuts. Friday in the Rust Belt meant more than the end of a work week. By late afternoon, parish kitchens came alive, steam rising from battered pots, the air sharp with vinegar and fried fish. In towns mapped by smokestacks and steeples, volunteers gathered in church basements, sleeves rolled, hands busy with battered cod, vats of beans, and endless loaves of bread. The menu was humble. Fish crisped golden, beans slow-cooked with pork ends and onions, coffee poured strong enough to keep a night shift moving. But the scale was anything but small. A single pot of beans could feed 100. A well-run fish fry might serve 1,000 plates before the last bell. These suppers did more than fill stomachs. They kept the lights on in the parish hall, paid for a neighbor's medicine, or covered a widow's rent. The coins collected at the door circled back into the neighborhood, funding soup kitchens, school books, or coal for the hardest winters. Behind every plate stood a crew, mostly women, some retired men, moving with the precision of a factory line, swapping stories and recipes between shifts. Their work mirrored the rhythm of the mills, fast, relentless, and essential. Each Friday's circuit wasn't just about food. It was a quiet rehearsal for solidarity, a weekly proof that when paychecks ran thin, community would carry the rest. A rope dropped from the second-floor window of Fisher Body Plant Number 1, swaying above a crowd of women in red berets and union armbands. At the end of that rope, a battered kettle, filled with beans slow-cooked alongside salt pork, onions, and whatever vegetables could be begged or borrowed that week, rose hand over hand. Toward the men barricaded inside, this was no charity meal. For 44 days, the strike kitchen became the lifeline of the sit-down, feeding over 5,000 people a day with industrial precision. 500 pounds of meat, 300 loaves of bread, 100 pounds of coffee, all counted, prepared, and dispatched under the watch of Dorothy Krause and Max Gazan, a chef who once cooked for Detroit's elite. The Women's Emergency Brigade stood guard at every delivery, forming human shields when police tried to block the doors, and running diversion when company men cut the heat or threatened the food lines. Beans weren't just cheap, they were tactical, easy to stretch, and hot enough to last the journey from kitchen to plant. Every pot hoisted through a window was a message. The community would not let hunger break the line. In those kettles, sustenance became strategy, and every spoonful kept the strike alive one more day. In 1936, during the Flint sit-down strike, records show that women's brigades delivered food in rope-hoisted buckets to workers occupying the factories, evidence of how food systems became survival tools when formal support failed. Across mill towns from Fairmont to Flint, immigrant bakers, church kitchen crews, and family butchers turned scarcity into sustenance with pocket meals, meat-stretching recipes, and 50-gallon communal stews. While historical menus and church fundraiser ledgers reveal much, gaps remain. Not every recipe was written down, and many cooks' names are lost to time. Yet, church suppers and festivals still echo these traditions in places like Wisconsin and West Virginia. Today, family recipes and community feasts are living records of mill-town ingenuity and solidarity. The evidence is clear. These 25 foods didn't just fill lunch pails. They built networks of care that shaped industrial America. As archives age and memories fade, preserving these food histories remains an urgent, unfinished task.